Hi, this is Ishi Abel with the Horse Human Connection. I have Charissa Schmidt with me today to comment on the YouTube and podcast that I did about Charlie Bucks. And a little bit of background is that Charissa had worked with Charlie when he was 5 for several months and got him to a place where she was able to get on and taught me a little bit more about training in the process. So
Mhm.
I'm anxious to hear all the things that you have to say. Oh, I also want to remind people that Carissa is a clinical supervisor and a help me out therapist.
So I have a LPC, so I have a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and then I my license is as a licensed professional counselor in Oregon, and then I'm credentialed to supervise LPCs and MFT, which are marriage and family therapists as well in the state of Oregon. So,
Okay, so because the story, as I told it on the podcast, has some elements of my treatment in EMDR possibly affecting some of my reality on that particular day too. So you're very well
right.
qualified to comment on the entire thing as a horse trainer, as a therapist, the whole thing.
Okay. I think I'm going to start within the scope of the horse trainer first and just like
Mhm.
so I listened to your podcast. You had told me a little bit about what was going on first, and then we tried to connect and talk, and the scheduling didn't work. So I got the story for the first time from you through the podcast. And then I responded and sent you some talking points and I what I want to do is just maybe model for the audience kind of the kind of conversations that I might have like that we've had before
Mhm.
about training. And we're going to do the horse stuff first, and then we might dive into the psychology a little bit. And I guess like another thing that I will add as far as my training and credentials go is that like in the therapy world, so I have training in systems theory, but I also have my passion, the place where I stay most curious and interested is in Jungian analytical psychology, depth psychology. And then I'm also in the process of training to become a Colfian sand play therapist, which is kind of, and this is all like within the psychoanalytic tradition. And then I'm also trained as a play therapist and a play therapy supervisor. And so we'll talk about play. That's kind of where I want to get the conversation to go. So I'm gonna get myself cozy. Okay, so let's talk about, I think one of the first things to talk about is just like why do horses buck? And if I'm gonna throw out like three big main reasons why horses buck, they're gonna buck if they're afraid, because it's a fight or flight. It's a fight response, right? They're afraid. They're gonna buck if they're in pain,
Mhm.
because the pain often triggers fear. And then they're gonna buck when they're playing. These are very different neurological states. Same behavior, different neuroscience. And that's going to inform like my training approach as we go into the conversation a little bit more. And so I guess a little bit of background for the listeners too, like you alluded in the podcast to maybe a possible injury that this horse has in the corrals before you got him.
Mhm.
And so when I was working with him as a trainer, I did a lot of rehab work in his back end to strengthen his hind end because if you watch him, he is very narrow behind. So these are some conformational things. And he doesn't track up at all in his hind end. He's improved with conditioning. And also he bunny hops in the canter. So like what that means is that there's not really a clear 3-beat stride. He tends to move his hind legs together in a hop. And so I pushed you to get him evaluated and make sure that there wasn't anything like medically wrong with him, just to kind of get clear on like, is his movement pattern a pain response? And so there's some history to this guy.
There
He
is.
never,
Can
yeah,
I clarify there a little bit? Like I do remember some of the exercises you had me do way back when I was at the other property when you were working with
right,
him, which
right.
was like backing him up hills. And
Yeah.
it seemed like there was a weakness in kind of on the inside of a stifle that we were
Yes.
particularly working on. And then
Yeah.
and I did go ahead and have the vet out here last winter or last fall.
Yeah. And that
And
was like after you sent me some videos of him in the ram pen, and I was just like, he's not even behind in his back end, and he was able to track up on one side but not on the other. And
not on
but
the other as well. Yeah, he had some trouble. But when they said he was fine to ride, he passed a lameness exam. And she
yes.
said, yes, I see a little something here, but it doesn't mean he can't be ridden. And
Right.
that was the professional opinion. And what you saw also, we saw an improvement because you had me, we were doing weaves over poles, over
Yes.
logs, the
Yes.
small logs, like 6, 7
Yes.
inch logs. And that seemed to strengthen him a little bit. But
Yeah. So
there's
this is a
still like every once in a while that back rear end will still get kind of tight, not nearly as bad as it used to, but his back glute will be hard. And if I do some massage and some release on it, it will soften up. And I kept checking in while he was down at the trainer saying, are you seeing any problems? Is there
Mhm.
any anything that would indicate, muscle soreness or stiff glutes or anything in his gait that would suggest that he's in pain or not quite right. And she was like, oh, he's fine. So that was her take on that.
Right. And okay, so here we are. We've done our due diligence and we've
Mhm.
like assessed the physical domain. Like we've assessed for pain, we've assessed the body. Yes, there's something about this horse that requires like careful conditioning and with maintenance, it's like he does come around. And I'm remembering back to like when I was working with him as a 5-year-old, this was not a horse that really showed a lot of like he didn't buck much with me. He was very forward, a little bit more flighty,
Mhm.
but he wasn't explosive when we did our initial saddling. If you got him moving forward, he was fine. And then I know I put the first few rides on him and got on his back. Well, no, maybe someone else had been on him. Yeah, other people had been on him.
One other person had been
Yeah,
with him, and that was the woman I bought him from, who was a
right.
very young girl, like maybe 17 or 18. And what she had told me is that he had bolted.
Yes. And that story kind of like matches like my experience of working with them is that he was more of a flighty horse than a bucky horse. And then, but I do remember like he definitely is a tight-backed horse. And so when he gets nervous, he's prone to bracing
Mm-hmm.
his body. And yeah. Okay, so there's some context there. So some of the things that I remember you talking about in your podcast was that he started bucking when you were going down a hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my mind, if I think about like the things that I know that might cause that, I'm just wondering like, one, did the saddle slide forward and maybe pinch him or touch him in a way that he had never experienced before? And then maybe there was pressure on his body from the saddle and the rider that was a new experience for him.
Mm-hmm.
And in that new experience, did he just panic?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing might be and I haven't seen him recently. I don't know what his condition's like right now, but given his history of being a little weak in the hind end, going down a hill is going to require him to engage his hind end deeper than on the flat or even uphill.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it possible that maybe like biomechanically his body was being taxed in a way that he just didn't feel confident in?
Yeah.
And then also like his lack of confidence maybe then turned into a panic moment. So those are like if we're thinking about like sympathetic nervous system response answers to why horses buck, like those are the two things I can think of.
Both of those things make perfect sense and could be either or both of them very, very easily.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially the saddle thing, because during the bucking, the pad came off.
Yeah, he might be the kind of horse then that could benefit from a rear cinch
Mhm.
just to help the saddle stay in place so that because what happens is that like when we're going down a hill, like the horse is tipped. If the saddle is tipping off the horse's back and the back of the saddle is lifting going down the hill,
Mhm.
that's gonna twist the tree and then you're gonna get a lot of pressure on the withers and the shoulders. And a rear cinch would keep the back of the saddle from lifting up.
Yeah, and we didn't, so we made some definite tack errors, and I would
Yeah,
error,
yeah.
and not having the bit in was one. And
Hmm.
she had noticed that the pad, we had that pad that you had found for me. It's like a synthetic leather on the top with the air holes in
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah. It's
And
like the Cavalio. It's
yes, the
kind of like a
Cavallio one.
thin, yeah,
And
uh-huh.
it was the first time we'd used that. And she'd said, "Oh, I think it's a little big," but we didn't switch it out for the one we'd used before, which was
So
like a
maybe it was
1 inch wool. Yeah.
like too long for his back.
I don't know what hurt. She said it seems too big. And she didn't say too long. She said too big. And so like
Huh.
I I don't know what that meant.
Well, he is kind of a petite horse.
But he
Like,
filled out into fitting the saddle,
right. But
which we
he is
used. Yeah.
like a short, he has a short
He
backed
definitely
kind
has
of,
a back.
and
It's
he
so
has a lighter frame. Yeah.
true. I mean, Sipsy is both of, I mean, she's not a lighter frame, but she's a short back too,
Right,
that we had
right.
used the pad in the saddle for. But, so there were some like to check all the boxes of the tack, and we had not put the breast collar and the rear cinch on as we had before.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, like, if it could be too that going, because I've had this happen too, where like a saddle pad will slip out the back of a saddle, and that's a sign that the saddle's not fitting as well as you want it to. And I'm not saying this saddle doesn't fit, but going down the hill, the fit changed.
Yes.
And when that saddle pad starts to scoot down their back and then go over the top of their loins, like it does kind of like goose them a little bit sometimes if they haven't had that happen. And so it might be that just going down the hill, the pad started slipping, the fit started changing, things started moving around, and he was just like, ah, I can't handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very likely what happened. And so I guess another question I have, I mean, I know you have some talking points in an order, and I'm sure you'll get to it, but where to now? Like, what do I do now?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about this is where I want to like bring in the element of play
Okay.
and talk about my evolving training philosophy and how I'm growing my ability to articulate these ideas and translate them across fields. And so let me back up and just share a little bit about what my therapeutic philosophy is, especially when I'm working with children. So I come from the sand play tradition is very, very feminine. It's very feminine in its approach to things. And I also have a lot of training in the humanistic play therapy modality called child-centered play therapy. And child-centered play therapy was developed by a woman named Virginia Axeline, and she was a colleague and a student of Carl Rogers. And a lot of people know Carl Rogers. He's like the founder of the humanistic person-centered school of psychology and therapy. And the person-centered humanistic philosophy is this idea that like in a therapeutic relationship, yes, I have training, I have a degree, but I'm not the expert in the room. The client's the expert in the room. And that's kind of turning upside down and turning on the head like the typical attitude that people have when they go into the therapy process. Like a lot of people show up for therapy saying, I'm going to go see this therapist, they're the doctor, they're going to fix me, and they submit to the therapist. And I'm here to say, no, 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 I'm here to submit to you. And I'm here to maybe help you find the answers within yourself because I believe they're already inside you. You just don't know it yet or you haven't found them, but I'll help you look. So that's like that's the person-centered, like in a nutshell. There's, there's more to it than that. So the child-centered therapy model is that philosophy applied to children. There's Gary Landreth from, he's still alive. He's in his 90s now, and he's mostly retired from teaching, but he pops up every once in a while and still does workshops. He's the one that kind of developed this into an evidence-based model. And now, so child-centered play therapy is a therapy model that is now an evidence-based practice for treating children with trauma. And so we're back to the conversation about insurance and things like that. It checks all the boxes, and so I can practice that. But my job in that model, and this is also a philosophy that shows up in the Jungian analytical and sand play world, is my job in that model is to simply show up as a present person and hold what we call a free and protected space for the client. So my job is just to show up and maintain the integrity of the space and do as much as I can to create a permissive environment for my client to self-express.
Yeah.
Now, if we think about classical dressage as a practice of zero force, my job is to show up in that horse's life and help them self-express and take away the barriers and open doors and allow and allow and allow. And so what that means is that when I work with horses, I have to be in a state of mind where I am ready and able to hold anything that horse wants to do. And this is where play comes in. So if we think of an adult horse or a horse that we're riding, and we think about a horse that bolts or bucks or is doing these big behaviors, we don't like it, and our impulse is often to shut it down.
Right. So I'm getting this visual of a perfect example, I think, of what you're talking about. And it's that day that we were at your place and you were riding Stormy. Were you riding?
Was it Billy?
I think it was Billy. Yeah, you were
The
riding
chestnut
Billy.
mare? The
Yeah.
chestnut mare, yeah.
And you were explaining to me how she got triggered with the bit, and you were
Yeah.
a Western bit that was different. And so when she got triggered, being a former racehorse, you just let her run. And I was able to film it. I don't know where the film is, it's somewhere.
I
And
think I
then,
have a copy somewhere. I think you
yeah.
sent me
And
one.
then
Yeah.
at the end, you said, and I'm going to stay on. And I remember all her veins were sticking out when you finally came back and you said, I'm going to stay on her until we both co regulate. And then I'm going to give her the biggest reward and get off.
Yes. So
That's kind of what
yeah.
you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes. So I have to be ready to stay with it. I
Yeah.
have to be ready to be with the horse no matter what. And so here's like something that I think might make sense to listeners is like I think most of the people listening to this podcast would never stop a foal from playing.
Right. I want to make a point in that example because I didn't explain it really well. Is that
Okay. Yeah,
what
going
you
back to
did?
Billy.
What, yeah,
Like,
back to Billy. What
yeah.
what you did when she got triggered, she wanted to run. And
Hmm.
you just, being the excellent rider you are, had no problem staying on and letting her ride out a quarter mile. Like she did huge circles in your pasture, and she must have covered
Well,
about a quarter mile before you came back and stopped.
but not only did I let her run, I said, "You want to run? Let's go." I
Mhm.
said, "You want to run? Let's go. I'm running with you." And this, like, I think is what the wisdom of running a horse in the round pen is. I'm not chasing the horse around until it's exhausted. I'm saying, I'm following and I'm saying, okay, you want to run? I'm going to run with you. And I'm going to, you're running big circles on the outside. I'm walking little circles on the inside, but I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. No matter what you think, no matter what you feel, no matter what you do, I'm with you. And that right there is the therapeutic principle that Carl Rogers brought forward of unconditional positive regard, where I say, I have positive regard for you as a being, no matter what you do. No matter what you say, no matter what you feel, no matter what you do, I'm with you.
Right. And that's what you told me. There was a moment in Charlie's training where he was so anxious in the ring. And you said, did you see that? He just figured out that we could stay heart to heart connected while he's in a balanced rhythmic trot.
Yes, I remember those moments.
Yeah. And so
And it
that's
took
what
a few days.
it did.
It took hours. It took him time to learn that I was going to be a consistent enough presence in his life to be with him no matter what.
I remember you saying, did you see that moment? And I did. It was clear. And that's exactly what you're talking about, right? These are both
Right.
examples of what you're saying.
And so this is where like I have the skill as a rider to get on a horse and know that I can ride through the buck.
Mhm.
And so I can, because I have the experience in my body of knowing what that energy is like, I can stay regulated in the intensity.
Right.
And this is where I think the word regulated gets misinterpreted because we think that regulated means calm,
Mhm.
but that's not true. Regulated does not mean calm.
What does it mean?
It means that we're in our parasympathetic nervous system. Most people access the parasympathetic through calm, low energy states. And this is where play comes in. So, play
Mhm.
is a parasympathetic nervous system state, but it includes the entire range of human experience. And
Wow.
it's the place that we practice the things we need to survive. So, when a little foal is ripping around the pasture as fast as it can and it's kicking its heels up and it's going and going and going and it's playing and it's, you know, that is not a sympathetic nervous system response. That's a parasympathetic nervous system state with intensity. And this is where things become relational. So I'm going to use examples from the therapeutic process in a playroom. So when I'm with children who've experienced trauma,
May,
go ahead.
may
Yeah.
I offer something? Because as you're saying that, I'm searching my childhood for a memory
Yeah.
that fits that. And what I'm coming up with is the memory of the edge. When as an only child, when there was
Mhm.
play, and I did have some trauma that came out of play,
Yeah.
there was always this edge where it got uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And then as a mother with my own children, as things would escalate in play, there'd be a place where I started to get really uncomfortable. And I think
So,
that's the
yeah.
switch. Like what I was experiencing was going from parasympathetic to sympathetic. And,
Yes.
and really feeling that edge, like as a highly sensitive autistic only child, like
Yes.
I can remember those moments, and so that's what you're speaking to.
Yes.
Okay.
So, okay, so maybe I'll take that. You gave an example before I gave one, so we'll build on that. So back to like, let's say going back to the training sessions I had with Charlie in the round pen with him before I got on him, we played with intensity a lot. And we used the idea of like turning up the volume, turning down the volume. And if we think about like people sometimes talk about our window of tolerance,
Yeah.
play is all of the behaviors that we can tolerate in the high highs and the low lows and everything in between that is inside our window of tolerance.
Okay.
When I step into a relationship and we're co-regulating, my window of tolerance is often bigger than the horse's
hmm
window of tolerance.
Can they borrow some of that? Do they borrow?
Yes, 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 yes. And that's how we grow it. And that's how it naturally grows in relationship between people too. So when I'm in the therapy room with the child, my job is just to have a bigger window of tolerance than they do while they explore all of these different states of being. And sometimes that looks like quietly coloring together. Sometimes that looks like pulling out the play swords and having a sword fight or a pillow fight.
Mm.
And so everything is allowed. In play, everything is possible. Everything is permissible.
Wow,
And I,
that's an incredible parenting thing for people to know and to realize, as well as horse trainers.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so much of our training methods is about restricting and controlling and shutting down behavior. And I do think that's maybe the difference between the performance world, like the pleasure world, things like that, where the horses, like, again, we're going back to the history of things where horses had to look a certain way in order to win the ribbon and earn the check.
mhm.
And so they became very boxed in and restricted. And that's different than some of the other schools where like it's okay if the horse makes mistakes and the horse moves its body out of rhythm or maybe has like a big bucky canter step or something like that because they have to do all of it in order to find it. And then we find ways that we can do it together.
It's a lot of layers, a lot of knowledge, a lot of being present and knowing what you're seeing and what you're working with and where to go with it.
So yeah. So this is to say that, like, let's say hypothetically, I was the person on Charlie's back
Mhm,
when he got Bucky,
mhm.
and like assuming that there's not a tack malfunction and I can stay on him. Like, like I'm gonna go to my skills. I'm gonna set some limits to maintain safety and the integrity of the relationship. And that limit might be doing a one rein stop and
Mhm.
say, okay, keep your feet on the ground right now while we reconnect and stay connected to one another. And I might, we can set limits with the other aids too. Like I'm gonna put some pressure on his, with a leg. I'm gonna maybe use my body and my weight to counterbalance and ride it out. Then the moment that chaos stops, we're gonna get back to work so that we can find the play again. And I'm gonna do what I have to do to test, okay, what is your window of tolerance right now? And what are the things that we can do in the vocabulary of all the things that we already know how to do together that create connection? And that might be bending laterally. That might be trotting him down the trail. It might be, whatever it is. I'm gonna take whatever energy he's giving me and we're gonna work with it. And we're gonna just stay connected, stay connected, stay connected. And I'm going to do whatever I can do to match his energy because there's something energetically about the reason why I need to be able to match his energy is that is my way of non-verbally communicating to another nervous system
Mhm.
that I'm with you.
So there's something that happens in horse training that is kind of like that, but I think that's why it works, but I don't think the way it's often executed and the philosophy behind it, like that's probably why it works, but I don't know that the philosophy behind it is that great. And that's where, in order to control a horse, like in the round pen,
Mhm.
a trainer becomes bigger than the horse, almost in a
Yeah,
scary way, and then brings them down. But that's different than what you're talking about.
right, because play is keeping the horse inside their threshold.
Yep.
So we're not flooding. We're still inside the threshold, but it still allows for big energy when we need big energy. And it also allows for really quiet, calm energy, the whole spectrum.
That's good to know. I did not realize this about play. I think it's really, really important. So at this point, it doesn't seem like it's going to hurt Charlie necessarily to wait a little while to see what happens. I haven't put a saddle back on him.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think that you do things at the pace you do them, and you have other ways of connecting with him, and he's still your horse. Like,
Yeah, no, the next
yeah,
day he really let me know, like, I'm still with you, you know,
yeah,
actually
like
right
I still trust
afterwards he
you.
did. Yeah,
Right. And lots of times they do. The moment is over, they're back to connecting.
yeah, very much connecting. Okay, so I had an animal communicator
Yeah.
check in with Charlie,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
he said a couple things that are pretty interesting to me. Um,
Okay.
do you remember some things that you used to say when you first were training him?
No, I'm not. It's been a few
Okay,
years.
okay, so
So,
this is what I remembered. Maybe if I say it, it'll jog your memory. That you would say to him or to me about him, he has a very young brain.
oh yes, he did. Like he was 5, but he felt more like working with a 3-year-old.
Okay, so he kept saying that to the animal communicator. I have a very young brain. And
He's embraced that.
finally, finally, she said, "Actually, you're 9 years old. You're a mature horse," and had a conversation with him about.
You have permission to grow up now. I love it. Oh my gosh.
And she kept saying, "I feel like he's 5 years old." And I said, "Well, that's how old he was when Carissa was working with him."
Interesting. Oh my
Isn't
gosh.
isn't that fascinating? So you'll have to watch. I haven't published it yet, but I think you'll get a kick out of seeing the things that he had to say. And he kept saying, "Too much, too fast. I need
Yeah.
breaks." And I remember you used to give him some good
Big breaks.
breaks,
He
right?
needs a lot of soaking time. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Like, yeah, he needs a lot of time to integrate and process.
yeah, he talked about that too. So just it's just kind of thrilling, you know. I mean, when you get the
Oh,
human words, I mean, they communicate a lot and we understand them, but it's just there's something charming about getting like the English language translated from them
right?
that just validates what we know happened. So yeah, that
Oh,
was
that is so sweet. I see he does have like a really youthful spirit about him still. Just in the photographs that I've seen of him recently and things, like it's still very much there.
yeah,
And
yeah, he's a sweetie.
mm,
He's a real sweetie. So, what do you think about what I was saying about like having that memory chain open with this idea thing happening of
ooh,
it was really heavy for me, but I wasn't the one writing him either. But from my perspective, I'm having the same thing happen in so many like so many parallels of, well, I said this, and I said this. I don't know. I mean, in the other situation, I really didn't know what else to do. In this
yeah,
situation, I could have spoken up. I could have taken charge more, but I chose to be in a place where I've said what I need to say, and
yeah,
this is not this is outside of my lane.
yeah. And so back to like the meme, yeah, I mean, you're gonna bring that energy into whatever the field, like, and they're gonna pick up on it. So, and because horses don't really filter, like whatever is going on is going on.
Mhm.
It, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, all of us are doing that all the time, which adds a completely different layer that I think most people aren't aware of.
Maybe I could use some language from the psychology world in my supervision process. I talked about this a little bit in the other podcast. So I employ a lot of what we call parallel process in my supervision practice. And it's working with ideas of transference and countertransference. And people might know what that is a little bit from the psychology world. So transference is transference is the energy that the client brings into the room. And so transference is like the unconscious stuff that then gets projected onto the therapist. And so, like, the classic example would be like, oh, a client comes in and they're mad at me because they're really mad at their mother. So that's the transference. The counter transference is then my emotional response that I might unconsciously or inadvertently put back onto the client. And so for me, that might be something like I have a client that is chronically late and I'm starting to get a little irritated because I feel disrespected. But
Mhm,
it's not about the client, it's about what's ever going on in my personal relationships.
mhm,
Um, so here we are. Now, in the Jungian school, we talk about a third process. So the Freudian school talks about transference, countertransference. The Jungian school talks about a third thing called the co-transference. And the co-transference is when we come together in relationship and the clients or the horse, because Charlie had his experience, right? Too much
mhm,
too soon.
mhm,
Too much too soon. And this idea, I've got a young brain. No, you don't. You're 9. But he is still working with the energy of being young.
mhm.
Okay. So he brings that into the relationship. You bring your stuff into the relationship. And then the co-transference is the alchemy that happens when those energies come together.
And whatever the trainer brought.
Right, exactly. Right, right. So parallel process is then assuming that like whatever energies are going on are gonna somehow be reflected in whatever meeting or like whatever encounter we have. And I can see this in my supervisees. So like if they're talking about a client, they're gonna take on the energy of that client when they talk about that client. And I can in the course of one supervision hour, they might talk about 3 different clients and there will be 3 different energies in the room.
How many people do you think are, I mean, I guess we're all responding to those energies all the time, but it's whether we're
Mhm.
doing it consciously or not.
Right, right.
What do you have any idea, like what percentage of the population is able to be conscious about that stuff?
I have absolutely no idea. I think that we all are capable of being conscious and unconscious. Like I have moments of consciousness and have moments of unconsciousness.
Yeah, I guess
And
all of us do. Yeah. Wow, lots of interesting points there.
yeah,
About getting off the horse. Like a lot of times, what I was talking about is part of the story is the times that I got on him twice after
yeah.
he came back from her place and before she came back and rode him again,
Hmm.
where he took me he was about to take me under a tree and he wasn't
Hmm.
responding to the boselle or my
Hmm.
leg. And so I
Hmm.
just jumped off.
Yeah.
And even with Sipsy, when she was refusing after I turned several times and we were really having a heated discussion about if we were going to, go around this gate. And finally, I mean, there was a trail enough around the gate.
Hmm.
I finally just got off and walked her.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say you're teaching the horse that you're giving him a release when they don't want to do what you're asking them to do. What do you have to say about that?
I think let's go back. Okay, yeah, because I can see how you might ask about that. We talked about how with Billy, that horse who wanted to run and run, like when she finally came back down and de-escalated and we were co-regulating again, then I got off, I took the saddle off. But that was not to release pressure. That was to create a new relational experience. This horse was dripping sweat.
Mhm,
So I took the saddle off and I brushed her down
mhm,
and I took care of her and
mhm.
I continued the connection and I attended to her body. And this is where, like, in the high performance world, like, you stay with the horse until their respiratory rate's down and their temperature's down. and you tend to them and tend to them and tend to them, and you don't leave them.
What about people when they're having PTSD episodes?
Right. Yeah. I'm
Same
gonna,
treatment
I'm
as
gonna, I'm gonna cancel my next client and I'm gonna stay with that client until they're regulated. And there's an art to kind of timing and facilitating a therapy session to make sure that the client is regulated by the time they walk out your door at the end of the hour. But I have canceled clients so that I can be with the person that needs it most and not abandon them.
I'm sure they really appreciate that. Like that I wish more
It
people did that. I don't know if it's a
it
standard
matters.
practice, but yeah, it
It
does.
matters. It's it's not standard practice. I don't like different people have different perspectives on things, but
Mhm.
when you start getting into trauma specialties, yes, that's best practice.
But you've also told me, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I'm going back to getting off the horse. You've also told me many times over the phone, it's okay to get off. Like if that's what you need to do.
Right. Because
Um,
what I'm hearing though is in those moments, yeah, you got off to for some self-preservation or to de-escalate a fight. But I'm not hearing that you just like walked away from your horse and threw him in a stall and stormed off all mad at them. You
no,
stayed, yeah, you stayed with them.
right.
So from the horse's perspective, you're still connected.
So it's not teaching. If somebody gets off during a period where they're trying to teach their horse something and the lesson isn't going well, especially if you don't end there, it's not a bad practice.
Right, right.
I think that's important for people to know that because I think that there's still some old myths about, what's okay to do and what's not okay to do. And the more neuroscience and the more relationship that we understand what we're forming, what we're doing with horses, that some of those myths really need to shift.
Yeah. And and this is again like there some of the myths that we have, some of the practices that we have in the horse world started out with good intentions
Mhm.
and then got turned into something else. And back to the idea of like making a horse run in the round pen. So chasing a horse around a round pen until it submits is I don't think that's how it started. I don't think that's how the practice started because that's not what was
No,
taught to me.
no. I mean, I actually went to see Monty Roberts was there. It was his apprentices that were doing the training.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I saw it live when I first got a horse, and it wasn't so much chasing. It was a balanced, grounded way in the middle, and not like I've seen some people do. But when you're new to all of that, the subtleties can easily escape you.
right. And if you don't have, and this is again like this is where having the benefit of having a teacher and a mentor supervise your work
Mhm.
is important because the mentor, Monty Roberts, was then able to step in and help correct his apprentices from chasing the horse down.
Mhm.
But then he published a book and people read it and then they applied the method without supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I have a video of myself chasing Firefly, having no idea what I'm doing, way too big. And she's running
Yeah.
so fast. I'm sure she's like, what are you doing?
That was one of the things that I first like stepped in and corrected when we first started working together. I'm like, why are you chasing your horse? You're scaring your horse. Like, why are you trying to scare your horse? And you were humble enough to listen. And that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate all your input and
Uh,
taking the time to do another podcast. I love it when we get to talk with you.
well, thanks for having me on. I'm curious to see who else responds to your invite to talk about this and hear other people's take
Yeah.
on what happened. This is a great series.
Yeah. It's been really good to learn from the experience, to think about it. And I'm so sorry that she got hurt. I really am.
Yeah. She
Um,
seems pretty humble about it though, and pretty grounded. And okay.
thanks, Carissa. You have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.